The air in the lecture hall was thick with the usual pre-training lethargy. 100 or so young Navy SEAL candidates, the very best of the best, sat in restless formation. They were athletes, swimmers, and wrestlers who had aced every physical challenge thrown at them so far. But today was different. Today wasn't a pool workout or a run on the beach. It was a lecture hall, and that meant one thing: a PowerPoint presentation. For these operators in training, nothing was more painful than sitting still. The door at the back of the hall swung open, and the sound of perfectly polished boots echoed off the cinder-block walls. A full-bird Navy SEAL colonel strode to the front of the room. He was the real deal, his chest adorned with enough brass and ribbon to tell a story of multiple combat tours without reading a single word. He had the look, the salt and pepper hair, the chiseled jaw, and the eyes that looked like they had seen things that would break lesser men. He placed his hands on the podium and scanned the room with the quiet intensity of a sniper picking a target. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice a low rasp that carried to the back row without a microphone. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've run more PT sessions than you've had hot meals. And in that time, I have heard every excuse in the book." A few of the candidates shifted in their seats, and they knew the game. The colonel was going to give them the no pain, no gain speech. They had heard it since boot camp. The colonel continued, his voice rising just slightly. "My feet hurt. My back hurts. I'm too tired. I didn't get enough chow. The water is too cold. The sun is too hot." He ticked each excuse off on his fingers. "You think the enemy cares if your feet hurt? You think a terrorist is going to wait for you to finish your Gatorade before he shoots at you?" He let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Today," he announced, "we are going to talk about mental toughness. We are going to talk about pushing past the pain. We are going to talk about saving your excuses for someone who cares." He clicked a remote, and the first slide flickered onto the screen behind him. It was a generic graphic of a mountain climber struggling up a peak. The candidates barely looked at it. They were too busy bracing themselves for the verbal assault they knew was coming, a classic back-in-my-day tirade about how soft the new generation was. The colonel launched into his lecture. He spoke about the physiology of pain, the psychology of endurance, and the importance of mission focus. He paced the front of the room like a caged tiger, his energy filling the space. "Your body is a liar," he growled. "It tells you to stop when you can go further. It tells you to quit when you can still win. You have to learn to ignore the voice of the body and listen to the voice of the mind." It was a good lecture. It was inspiring. It was exactly what the candidates needed to hear to get them fired up for the afternoon's hellish workout. They were starting to nod along, the testosterone beginning to pump, and then, the heavy metal door at the back of the lecture hall creaked open again. This time the sound was different. It wasn't the confident stomp of a colonel. It was softer, hesitant. A figure in desert camouflage utility uniform walked in. She was short, slight, and clearly not a SEAL. She was a Marine, a gunnery sergeant by the look of her rank, and she was late. The colonel stopped his pacing mid-stride. He looked at the woman, and a flicker of something, annoyance, crossed his face. And this was his moment, his lecture, his audience. He didn't appreciate the interruption. "And who do we have here?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like the Marine Corps got lost on the way to the PX." A few of the candidates snickered. The woman stood her ground near the door, her eyes fixed on the colonel. She didn't flinch. The colonel turned back to his audience, using the interruption as a teachable moment. "See, gentlemen, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Lack of discipline, lack of punctuality, showing up late with some excuse about traffic or getting lost." He shook his head in mock disappointment. "In the Navy, we have a saying, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. It's about respect." He gestured vaguely toward the woman, not even looking at her. "Gunnery sergeant, I'm sure you have a very good excuse for disrupting my class. But as I was just explaining to these future leaders, we don't do excuses here. So, why don't you save your breath and have a seat in the back? Quietly. It was a brutal dressing down, delivered in front of 100 of the military's most elite trainees. It was the kind of public humiliation that would make most people want to sink into the floor. The colonel turned back to his podium, expecting the matter to be closed. He clicked to the next slide, ready to resume his sermon on mental fortitude. But the gunnery sergeant didn't move to the back. She didn't sit down. Instead, she took a single step forward into the aisle. "Sir," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor blade. The colonel spun around, surprised. "Excuse me?" "I heard what you were saying as I came in, sir," she continued, her voice steady despite the 100 pairs of eyes now locked on her. "About pushing through the pain, about ignoring the voice of the body, about saving our excuses." The colonel's jaw tightened. "Gunnery sergeant, you are out of line. I am in the middle of a lecture." "Yes, sir," she replied. "And I think I have something to add to it, if you'll permit me." The room was dead silent. The candidates were holding their breath. This was mutiny. This was a Marine, a mere gunnery sergeant, challenging a Navy SEAL colonel in his own house. The colonel stared at her for a long, hard moment. He could have had her thrown out. He could have destroyed her career with a single phone call. But something in her eyes, a calm, a quiet certainty, made him hesitate. "Make it quick," he said finally, his voice a low warning. The gunnery sergeant nodded. She walked slowly down the center aisle, her boots making soft thuds on the linoleum. The candidates watched her pass, their earlier smirks replaced by confusion. She stopped at the front of the room, standing next to the colonel but facing the audience. "Thank you, sir," she said. "My name is Gunnery Sergeant Rose Marie Noel, and I'm not here to talk about theory." She reached up and unbuttoned the top button of her blouse. The colonel frowned. The candidates leaned forward. With deliberate slowness, she pulled the collar of her uniform aside, revealing the side of her neck and the curve of her jaw, and the room gasped. A vicious, puckered scar ran across her cheek. It was an ugly, angry thing, a twisted line of raised tissue that disappeared toward her ear. And it looked like someone had taken a hot poker and dragged it across her face. "This isn't a birthmark," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "And it's not a surgical scar. This is a piece of metal that hit me on August 27th, 2005. She let that sink in for a moment. The colonel stared, his face unreadable. The candidates were frozen. "I was at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq," she continued. "I was an aviation electrician with a Marine Aviation Logistics Squadron. It was a regular day, hot, dusty, nothing special. I was in my bunk, trying to get some sleep before my next shift. Then, the rockets came in. Indirect fire, we called it. You never hear the one that hits you." She traced a finger lightly along the scar. "This piece of shrapnel missed my carotid artery by millimeters. It missed my jugular. The doctors told me later that if it had hit a fraction of an inch in any other direction, I would have bled out before anyone could reach me. I would have died on a cot in a dusty hangar, thousands of miles from my son." The mention of a son hit the room like a physical blow. This wasn't just a Marine. This was a mother. "The doctors wanted to send me home," she said. "They wanted to put me on a medevac flight out of Iraq. They said I needed surgery, that I needed recovery time. They gave me an excuse, a golden ticket, a way out of the combat zone." She paused, looking directly at the young SEAL candidates. "My family was scared. My unit thought I was crazy. But I looked at that doctor, and I told him no. I told him to stitch me up, give me some painkillers, and send me back to my post." "Why?" The question came from the colonel. It was barely a whisper, but in the silent room it sounded like a shout. All trace of his earlier arrogance was gone. He was just a man, asking a question. Gunnery Sergeant Noel turned to face him. Because, sir, the mission wasn't done. My Marines were still there. They were still turning wrenches, still fixing jets, still getting shot at every night. They needed their gunnery sergeant. They didn't need me to be comfortable. They needed me to be present. She turned back to the candidates. The doctor said I was insane. He said I was risking my life. And maybe I was. But I learned something a long time ago. The body is weak. It bleeds. It breaks. It scars. But the spirit? The spirit is mission. The spirit is the people to your left and right. The spirit doesn't bleed. She let the silence stretch. So, when you talk about excuses, about your feet hurting or being tired or not having enough sleep, I understand. I do. Those things are real. They hurt. But I want you to look at this scar. She pointed to her face. I carry this with me every day. Every time I look in the mirror, I see it. And you know what? It doesn't hurt anymore. But the memory of why I stayed, the memory of looking my Marines in the eye the next morning and proving that I wouldn't abandon them, that feeling, that never fades. She buttoned her blouse back up. I didn't come here to interrupt your lecture, sir. I came here because I was told there were future leaders in this room who needed to understand the difference between pain and purpose. Pain is a piece of metal in your face. Purpose is staying in the fight anyway. She nodded once at the colonel. Thank you for your time, sir. I'll see myself out. She turned and walked back up the aisle. No one moved. No one breathed. But the heavy metal door creaked open and then clicked shut behind her. She was gone. The colonel stood frozen at the podium. For a full 30 seconds, he didn't move. He just stared at the door through which she had disappeared. The slide behind him still showed the picture of the mountain climber. It looked ridiculous now. Pathetic. Finally, the colonel cleared his throat. He looked down at his notes, then crumpled them up in his fist. He looked at the candidates. Gentlemen, he said, his voice hoarse. Class dismissed. He walked out of the room without another word. He didn't go to his office. He went to the parking lot, hoping to catch a glimpse of a short Marine in desert camouflage. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to thank her. But she was gone. The story of what happened in that lecture hall didn't stay in that room. It spread through the base like wildfire. By the end of the week, and everyone knew about the Navy SEAL colonel who had been silenced by a Marine gunnery sergeant and her shrapnel scars. They knew about the woman who had turned a lecture on excuses into a lesson on sacrifice. For the candidates, the afternoon PT session was different that day. No one complained. No one lagged behind. No one made excuses. They ran harder, pushed further, and swam faster. Because in the back of their minds, they kept seeing that scar. They kept hearing her voice. And they knew that their pain was temporary. Her scar was permanent. And she had chosen it. Gunnery Sergeant Rose Marie Noel didn't just become a footnote in their training. She became a benchmark. For the rest of their careers, when these men faced impossible odds, when their bodies screamed at them to quit, they would remember the woman in the desert uniform who had walked into the lion's den, bared her scars, and taught a colonel what real toughness looked like. And they saved their excuses for someone who cared.